Russians are trying to establish a more stable presence on the border between the Donetsk and regions, but encounter heavy Ukrainian resistance and terrain obstacles. To bypass the problematic area, they launched a risky pincer movement on the flank, hoping to surprise the Ukrainian defenders. The Russians managed to advance by around 3 kilometers in the last months, which encouraged them to push further. Russia's operational goal here is to capture Pokrovsk, a key logistical hub that could open the gates to Zaporizhzhia and would allow them to bypass the strong Ukrainian defense lines to the southwest. However, first, they need to take Velykomykhailivka under their control, as this would put the Ukrainian logistics via road N15 under constant risk. Securing it would also give Russian forces a substantial foothold beyond the Vovcha River, an important natural barrier allowing them to consolidate and amass troops and supplies for a potential offensive. Additionally, such a breakthrough would create an additional pressure point for the Ukrainian command, further overstretching their already limited resources. However, Velykomykhailivka's terrain favors the Ukrainians, with the forest shielding it from the east and the winding Vovcha River to the south and east, making river crossings difficult and a frontal mechanized assault nearly impossible. The situation is further complicated by the higher terrain north of the town, which gives the defenders fire control and observation points. Velykomykhailivka and the high grounds behind serve as a shield, as they are followed by open fields, which are harder to defend and would benefit the Russians if they manage to break through. Because of the disadvantages of the terrain, the Russian command has come up with the plan to outflank the defense and avoid a costly frontal assault. They will try to semi-encircle Velykomykhailivka by moving through Oleksiivka towards Kolomytsi, and then starve the well-protected town by exerting fire control over the logistics route to Pokrovsk and by shelling Velykomykhailivka itself. Unfortunately for the Russians, the Ukrainian operators located them on time, and FPV drones hit the supply truck first before switching to the buggies. The immobilized vehicles were then finished off with drone-dropped grenades, while the surviving soldiers were annihilated in another Ukrainian tank raid before they were able to dig in. Overall, the unfavorable terrain and the Ukrainian surveillance near Velykomykhailivka forced the Russians to try a pincer maneuver. This was rebuffed by the Ukrainians with precision drone fire and the ability of tanks to clear small buildings with ease. Despite this initial failure, Russia will try again, as this is currently the sector where they have achieved the most gains with the least resources. However, even when more Russian forces are thrown in, the river and the Ukrainian defense behind it on the higher ground will be harder to overcome than the open fields leading to them.
White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt said Wednesday Democrats are selectively leaking emails from disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein and using the Epstein scandal to distract from their government shutdown failures. There are no coincidences in Washington, D.C. And it is not a coincidence that the Democrats leaked these emails to the fake news this morning ahead of Republicans reopening the government. This is another distraction campaign, Leavitt said. According to Associated Press, the comments follow the release of emails by the House Oversight Committee on Wednesday that add to the questions about President Donald Trump's relationship with Epstein and about any knowledge he may have had in what prosecutors call a years-long effort by Epstein to exploit underage girls. The Republican president denies any knowledge of Epstein's crimes. In one of the released emails from 2011, Epstein wrote that Trump had spent hours at Epstein's house with a victim of sex trafficking and said in a separate message years later Trump knew about the girls. Leavitt was also asked about reports that the White House met with U.S. Representative Lauren Boebert, Republican Colorado, to discuss the Epstein files, and she said it shows transparency that members of the Trump administration are willing to brief members of Congress. Leavitt then seemed to indicate that White House officials met with Boebert in the White House Situation Room to discuss the Epstein files, saying, "I'm not going to detail conversations that took place in the Situation Room in the press briefing room." The press secretary also slammed the BBC as a leftist propaganda machine. The president has made it very clear that this is a leftist propaganda machine that is unfortunately subsidized by British taxpayers, and he thinks that's extremely unfortunate for the great people of the United Kingdom and Great Britain, Levitt said.
And it feels like Groundhog Day being up here again talking about this Democrat shutdown. And the answer to that question is pure partisan politics. And this entire thing, again, it's not a coincidence to the American people at home. There are no coincidences in Washington, D.C. And it is not a coincidence that the Democrats leaked these emails to the fake news this morning ahead of Republicans reopening the government. This is another distraction campaign by the Democrat and the liberal media, and it's why I'm being asked questions about Epstein instead of the government reopening because of Republicans and President Trump.
But given your interest in transparency, Caroline, why are White House officials then meeting with Representative Boebert in an effort to try and get her to not sign this petition calling for the release of the files?
Doesn't it show transparency that members of the Trump administration are willing to brief members of Congress whenever they please? Doesn't that show our level of transparency? Doesn't that show the level of transparency when we are willing to sit down with members of Congress and address their concerns? That's a defining factor of transparency, having discussions with members of Congress about various issues. And I'm not going to detail conversations that took place in the Situation Room in the press briefing room. Reagan. Stephen, go ahead.
Well, if the president is considering a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell?
Again, he's answered this repeatedly. It's not something he's talking about or even thinking about at this moment in time. I can assure you of that. Stephen.
Caroline, I've got...
The Director General of the BBC yesterday described the organisation as the very best of society and blamed the enemies of the BBC for this outcome. Also yesterday, a senior government minister launched a fierce defence of the channel in the House of Commons, saying that the broadcaster remains a light on the hill for people all over the world. So, does the President feel that the network is taking the situation seriously? Does he believe that they've shown sufficient regret? Does this strain the relationship between the President and the Prime Minister? And given that the organisation is publicly funded, is the President prepared to bankrupt the BBC in his pursuit of truth and justice?
Well, thank you, Bev. There's a lot of questions in one there. I will say I know the President has a very good relationship with Prime Minister Sharma. You have been there, you've seen them in their interactions, you've questioned both leaders in your time joining us when we've gone to the United Kingdom a few different times now. However, he has always been very frank when he disagrees with leaders even whom he has a good relationship with. And the BBC, being a fair news organization, is definitely an outlet. I think these two leaders would disagree. The President has made it very clear that this is a leftist propaganda machine that is unfortunately subsidized by British taxpayers, and he thinks that's extremely unfortunate for the great people of the United Kingdom and Great Britain. And I think that the President was deeply concerned by the editing, the purposeful and dishonest editing of his speech that was so clearly fake news, and he rightfully dubbed that term many years ago, and this is a classic example of that. We see it in the United States all the time. We see it now in the United Kingdom. As you know, the President's external legal counsel has filed a lawsuit against the BBC. We expect that to continue, and whether they apologize or not is up to them. Thanks for being here, Beth. Ouija.
Thank you, Caroline.
Sure.